So hello, everyone. My name is Deborah Brown. I am co-president of Grant Professionals of Lower Hudson. My co-president, Maureen Fox, is here with us, but she's having some internet difficulties, so she's limiting herself to audio. So that's why you're not seeing her face. I want to thank our sponsors, which are the United Way of Westchester and Putnam, the United Way of the Dutchess and Orange region, Choice Words, Nonprofit Westchester, Executive Printing and Direct Mail, and our consultant sponsors. And all of you make it possible for us to bring this and other worthwhile programs to our membership. And if any of you is affiliated with an organization that might be interested in sponsorship, feel free to contact us at info.gplh@gmail.com or just go to our website at gplh.org and you'll see that there is a form there to fill in. I want to let everyone who's attending today know that you are eligible for one GPCI education credit, 1 point, after full participation in today's program. So if you're going for your GPCI, and I believe it also applies for CFRE, this can be useful for you. So I am also going to just have a shout out to the members of our board who are attending. And if you could raise your hands and give everybody a wave, that would be great. And also, I believe you all been notified, but we are recording this today. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to Michelle Neptune, who is the chair of our program committee. Take it away, Michelle.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the GPLH webinar on digital innovation.
Michelle, you're muted.
So thrilled to welcome you and our speaker this afternoon. Let's see your name and organization on your little Zoom box you've got there. So rename yourself so that we can have a little Q&A at the end and we know who we're talking to. As you may know, programs are free for GPLH.
Can anybody hear Michelle? Because I can't.
I can hear her.
I can.
Yes, we all
You
hear
can.
her.
Okay, there's something wrong on my end. Then I will just be quiet. Keep going, Michelle. Sorry.
Okay. So if you are a member, our programs are free. Our next program will be on the New York State Consolidated Funding Application, which should be coming out in the next couple of weeks. We will be featuring our own GPLH Vice President, Susan Matheson, who is here today. Hello, Susan. Susan of SAM Fundraising Solutions. We will announce that date once the CFA has been released, but we think we will hold the webinar in May. So keep checking your website and your email for updates on that one. Our next connections call for members only will be on June 12th at 9:30 a.m. So I look forward to seeing you guys there. If you're not a member and you paid for this event, we will happily apply that fee to your membership. Use coupon code SAVE30 at gplh.org. After this session, I will distribute an email with the recordings and slides, so you will receive that. And of course, the materials are always available on the members only part of our website as well. I will also include a survey. Please complete the survey. It helps us determine what programs we should be looking out for you guys. Also keep yourself muted until the end, and there will be some time for Q&A at the end. I am, without further ado, so thrilled to introduce today's speaker. Tom Scheinfeld is professor of digital humanities at the University of Connecticut, go Huskies, where he holds appointments in the Department of Digital Media and Design, as well as the Department of History. Tom is also the director of Greenhouse Studios, a transdisciplinary research unit that solves the problems and explores the opportunities of scholarship in the digital age. Welcome, Tom, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here today. Today I'm going to talk about, as that first slide says, talk about innovation. But I'm going to talk about it somewhat differently than you probably most often hear it talked about. When we hear about innovation, it's most often in the context of science, technology, engineering, and medicine, the STEM fields, very often in the context of business. While I will use examples from science and technology, I'm a historian of science by training, so it's kind of my wheelhouse. I don't believe that innovation is something that is exclusive to those STEM fields. Um, Innovation isn't something that some fields have and other fields lack. Um, Innovation can and does come from anywhere. And indeed, we're all innovating all the time, whether we recognize it or not. And one of the things I hope you take away from this talk today is how to recognize innovation and how to make a habit of recognizing it. Nor do I think that innovation is a personality trait that some of us have and some of us lack. I don't think that there are innovative people and not innovative people. Innovative, uh, Being innovative isn't something inherent, something we're born with, something that we can't change. Instead, I think that being innovative, being creative is the product of certain behaviors, certain habits of mind, certain ways of being in the world. Just as being healthy isn't something you have, but something you work at, being creative isn't a fixed trait. It's not something that you are, but something that you do. Moreover, it's not something you just do once. You don't eat cheeseburgers every day for lunch, then have a salad one day and say, okay, job done, I'm healthy. No, you've got to choose the salad over and over again and exercise and get enough sleep. That's how you become healthy. We're all in a process of becoming. None of us are healthy. We're all doing our best. And being innovative is like that. It's something you have to repeat. It's something you have to practice. It's a habit. And that's true of both individuals and institutions. So what does the practice of innovation look like? What are the repeated behaviors that cultivate creativity? What are the good habits we have to foster? The salads? And what are the bad habits we have to break? The cheeseburgers. What are the habits that promote innovation and what are the habits that stifle it? So today I'm going to start by offering 3 healthy habits, practices we should cultivate, both in our individual creative lives and in our organizations. And I'll illustrate the power of these habits with some examples from the history of science and technology, and also from my own work. And then I'll turn to 3 unhealthy habits we should avoid. And then in conclusion, I'm going to suggest a few ways that we can use these lessons in innovation to meet challenges in this fast-changing world. Challenges of disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence, challenges of an increasingly hostile political environment, challenges of climate change, and all of the other things we face in our lives, in our work, in our society. So 3 healthy habits. The first one I want to share is the habit of operationalizing your byproducts, of making the leftovers the meal. And what do I mean by operationalizing your byproducts? Well, in the process of building anything, of making anything, of doing anything, we end up with byproducts. Whenever we engage in our main activity, perhaps it's fundraising, perhaps it's grant making, perhaps it's grant writing, as we were talking about earlier, perhaps it's financial planning, we produce a lot of stuff. And some of that stuff is our main product, our final output, the grant proposal, whatever. But some of that stuff is process, interim products that get us to our final output, but aren't the final output itself. Filmmakers talk about B-roll or the cutting room floor, images that will never appear on screen, but were necessary to capture, to achieve the final cut. For you, maybe that leftover stuff isn't B-roll images. Maybe it's a grantee database. Maybe it's a proposal workflow. Maybe it's a reporting process. Maybe it's an investing strategy. Maybe it's a set of email templates. I'm not in your workplace, so I can't say for sure. But what I can say for sure is that one of the habits of truly innovative people and organizations is that they make use of these leftovers. They keep them, they remember them, and they recycle them. Probably the best example of this habit of operationalizing byproducts is Amazon and its Amazon Web Services platform. Most of us know Amazon as an online retailer, but for at least the last 15 years, retail has made up a fairly small share of Amazon's overall revenues. A much larger share comes from Amazon Web Services. Amazon Web Services is a service that Amazon sells that allows you to use its server architecture, its databases, its middleware, its web servers, its storage, its security and privacy protocols to run your own websites. Before AWS, most companies ran websites on servers that they owned themselves using hardware that they maintained, software that they installed, security that they built themselves. I did that for years early in my career. But today, most companies run their websites, quote, in the cloud, right? That is using Amazon's hardware, software, storage, or similar offerings from Google, Microsoft, or Oracle. For a relatively modest cost, Amazon Web Services lets you use the same service architecture that it runs Amazon.com on, that it runs Kindle books on, that it runs Prime Video on, that it runs Alexa on. It lets you use that same architecture for your own website. Now, probably most of us are old enough to know that in its earliest days, Amazon was primarily an online bookstore. You see the little arrow there on the logo goes from A to Z. This is A to S, but on the Amazon logo it goes A to Z. That's because it was a bookstore, right? Get it? All the books from A to Z. But eventually, we all know Amazon branched out into selling other things, which was a fairly obvious move. If you get good at managing databases of books, if you get good at the user interfaces and marketing and supply chains and inventory systems and logistics of selling and shipping books, well, why not apply those aptitudes to selling other stuff? And Amazon, unlike some other early dot-com era internet companies, was particularly focused on growth at the expense of all other business values, such as profit taking or its exit strategy. And indeed, for most of its history, despite its size and market dominance, Amazon ran at a loss as it put more and more of its revenues into building the technical and infrastructural capacity to grow ever larger. And so for at least Amazon's last 2 decades, or for its first 2 decades rather, its focus was always on making preparations for being bigger next year, right? Amazon always wanted to be bigger next year, and that meant building excess capacity, more warehouse space, more workers, more web services, more robust web architecture, more than it actually needed at the time to run its business. Amazon always had room to grow. And in the mid-2000s, the team who ran this bigger than necessary web infrastructure, led by Andrew Jassy, had a realization. What if we allowed other smaller companies to use our excess capacity in the world-class web infrastructure we've built? What if we allowed them to use our servers, our storage, our database architecture, our development tools, our security adaptations for a fee? What if instead of buying and running hardware and hosting their own e-commerce websites, we let them use our superior technology at a lower cost? After all, we already have all this excess capacity lying around. And for most smaller internet operations, including mine, it was a no-brainer. You would be crazy to keep that Dell and its rickety homespun web server running in the closet when you could simply use Amazon's vastly better systems for less money. And today, Amazon Web Services is the largest part of Amazon's business. Amazon isn't a bookstore anymore. It isn't really even an online retailer. It's a technology services company. And it's telling that when Jeff Bezos stepped down as CEO of Amazon, Andy Jassy, the person who launched Web Services, was the person tapped for that CEO role. The point here is that Amazon didn't build a way too big technical infrastructure in order to launch a web services business. They did it for other reasons. They did it to facilitate the growth of their main business, the retail business. But they were self-aware enough to realize that the excess technical capacity that they had could be repurposed, that the byproducts of their e-commerce business could be operationalized, and that in the end, the byproduct could become the main product. And Amazon has repeated this move again and again, allowing other companies to piggyback on their, for instance, on their advanced logistics systems. So Amazon is now, with FedEx probably, and DHL, the largest logistics company in the world. They piggybacked on their intellectual property licensing expertise to launch Amazon Prime Video and the movie studios that they now operate, right? Books are nothing but a nice sideline for Amazon anymore. Their byproducts have become their main product. And this lesson of operationalizing byproducts is something I've taken repeatedly in my own practice. And I'll offer just one recent example. My lab, Greenhouse Studios, runs a professional development program called Network Lab. And so Network Lab has its origins during the pandemic. And during the pandemic, as everybody did, we went online. And all of our work is highly collaborative, involving both internal and external partners. And when everything went online, we struggled with how do we continue to collaborate amongst ourselves with the team? How do we collaborate with our partners at other institutions? How do we maintain this collaborative workplace, these collaborative processes in the absence of face-to-face communication? And we certainly weren't alone in this challenge, but a few of our team members decided very early on in the pandemic to document all the different things we were doing, all the different remote collaboration technologies and methods we were trying, what worked and what didn't, with the idea that the lockdowns might last a lot longer than we all hoped, and that we'd need to get better at this new mode of working. And over the course of the couple of years of the pandemic, we did get better, largely because we were documenting our progress. This informal documentation that we had been gathering became ultimately a kind of internal manual for working online. And this has turned out to be extremely valuable, this manual, to have, because we continue to be a hybrid workplace. I'm sure most of you work in hybrid workplaces at this point. And we continue to refine and use the tools and methods we developed from the very first days of the pandemic to accomplish what is now our main work. So this has been great for us. But again, lots of organizations struggle with this. And there we saw an opportunity. We realized that we could operationalize that byproduct, that manual, for our own collaborative processes, and provide it as an external program, as a curriculum and a course to other people in other groups in our field, to teach other faculty members, librarians, museum professionals, and others in the cultural sphere to work more effectively with their colleagues and stakeholders in the hybrid environment. And so Network Lab, once a byproduct, has become one of our core products. It has become one of our kind of signature offerings as a unit. So again, operationalizing byproducts. A second healthy habit that I want to explore is cultivating subcultures, keeping your organization weird. Innovation doesn't usually come from the mainstream. It doesn't usually come from the establishment. It doesn't usually come from the top. The established and the powerful are usually too busy protecting their position to innovate. And why should they? They're doing just fine, doing the things they're doing. Instead, innovation comes from the fringes, and you should cultivate the fringes of your organization the fringes of your business, the fringes of your communities. In the mid-1970s, there emerged on the fringes of the San Francisco Bay Area computer science establishment at well-established companies like Xerox and Hewlett-Packard and the computer engineering departments of Berkeley and Stanford, a group of enthusiast engineers who were tinkering with building small computers in their garages and basements. Now, at the time, computing was not like we know it today. The earliest computers, which grew out of the World War II military-industrial complex, were enormous machines called mainframes. But the central characteristic of the mainframe computer wasn't its size, but rather its computing architecture, which was highly centralized. Users of mainframes didn't have access to the computing resources of the machine, to the guts of the machine. Mainframes were hard-coded by the engineers that built them, by the engineers at the factory, for certain particular predefined purposes. They were not multi-purpose machines like the ones we use today. Users couldn't program them for new tasks or install new applications. A human resources mainframe couldn't be used to play games. An inventory system couldn't be used for word processing. If a user wanted to alter the purpose of the mainframe, they either got a new mainframe or they sent it back to the company for the engineers to hard code the new functionality. But some of the engineers at those companies had a different vision for computing. These folks wanted a computer at home that they could use for a range of purposes. I mean, they knew what they were doing. They could code the machines themselves, and they wanted one to play around with at home. They wanted to balance their checkbooks. They wanted to write letters. They wanted to track their weight. They wanted to play games. They wanted to do all the things that we now do on our personal computers. And they had the skills to build them. And by March of 1975, there were enough of these folks building what came to be known as personal computers in their garages and basements to found a club that would become known as the Homebrew Computer Club. And here on the screen, you see the first newsletter of the Homebrew Computer Club from March 15th, 1975. And it was a little flyer that they sent around, and it said, you know, are you building your own computer? Terminal, TV typewriter, right? A typewriter attached to a TV, an I/O, an input-output device, or some other digital black magic device. If so, you may want to come to a party at Gordon's Garage to talk about it. Now, keep in mind that the idea that an individual person, somebody might own their own computer, was completely outside the mainstream at the time. Computers were heavy equipment that the military and government agencies and big businesses used to do things like track ordnance and tally the census and manage employee hours and log parking tickets for the police department, right? They were not something that any ordinary person would even think to have at home. They weren't something ordinary people would ever even think about. And indeed, in 1977, Ken Olsen, the CEO of Digital Equipment Corporation, probably the second largest computer company in the world at the time, said just that. He said, there is no reason any individual would need a computer in his home. And that year, 1977, was the same year that one of the new personal computers that emerged from the Homebrew Computer Club was released for sale, the Apple II. Another product that was demoed at Homebrew, Microsoft's MS-DOS operating system, was released in 1981. And instead of saying that there's no reason that any individual would need a computer in his home, Bill Gates launched MS-DOS with a new motto for Microsoft. A computer in every home and on every desk, all running Microsoft software. And within 10 years, personal computing had become the dominant model of computing. And within another 5 years, Gates' prediction of a computer in every home and every office, all running Microsoft software, had come to pass. And Digital Equipment Corporation was out of business. The lesson here is that the mainstream of an industry or an organization can't always see where that industry is heading. In the late 1970s, personal computers were virtually unimaginable to the smartest people working in the computer industry. But on the fringes of those companies, in the garages and basements of some of their junior engineers, the future was already here. The homebrew computer club was a subculture that the mainstream would have done well to cultivate within its organizations instead of dismissing and leaving themselves vulnerable to destruction from without. An example for my own work is something we call the Treehouse. Treehouse is a weekly career and life skills workshop started by the undergraduates in my lab. About 2 years ago, the undergraduate research assistants started meeting informally over lunch to talk about their courses, get help on homework from their peers, discuss their career prospects, and yes, gripe about professors, which I overhear these meetings sometimes, and that there's a lot of that. But this informal meeting of undergraduates gradually morphed into a more formal presentation, professional development series, with students taking turns presenting, making formal presentations of skills they had learned or projects they had done, cool ideas they had come across. Eventually, they started inviting occasional guest speakers and giving workshops in career skills and pathways. Eventually, the graduate students in the lab and some of the junior staff started joining the undergraduates for this event. And as this treehouse thrived, we gave it increasing amounts of support. We paid the students for the time they spent to organize it. We gave them the space, the time to do it. We gave them space in the lab to organize themselves and to meet. We paid for the occasional pizza delivery or honoraria for a guest speaker. The success of their efforts showed that the students had clearly identified a need among their peers for the kind of career support they were offering. And in doing so, they presented us, Greenhouse, the leadership, with an opportunity. Over time, this informal series of talks, presentations, and workshops has coalesced into a kind of curriculum. And Greenhouse Studios, with significant student leadership of the effort, has begun working with other units on campus, the Office of Student Advising, Career Services, the various dean's offices, to offer student workshops in what we're calling life design that grew directly out of the Treehouse program. And so by supporting this kind of subculture within the organization, we're able to cultivate a new line of work, keeping that business in-house rather than forcing it outside, like Ken Olsen did. And this is now one of the most exciting things we're doing. And it all comes from these student workers. All right. Third habit, explore the adjacent possible. Borrow ideas from other domains. I take this term adjacent possible from Stephen Johnson's book, Where Good Ideas Come From, which I really, really recommend to you. What Johnson means by the adjacent possible are the opportunities that are just outside the circle of things that draw your daily attention. The things that are just one step removed from what you normally do and think about. Now, there are always some good ideas in your immediate view, but most good ideas are just outside your line of sight, in the places, people, disciplines, fields, books, and media that are close to what you do, but not exactly what you do. In Where Good Ideas Come From, Johnson gives the example of the French physician Etienne Tarnier, who lived in the mid-19th century. Tarnier was an obstetrician who worked in the Children's Hospital in Paris. As an obstetrician, Tarnier was confronted daily by the painful reality of 19th century infant mortality. During the 19th century, fully 1 in 5 babies died in infancy. Right? That is shocking, right? 1 in 5. Now, and that was the rate in Paris, the most sophisticated and wealthy city in the world. Death rates in the rest of Western Europe and the United States were similar, but death rates in Eastern Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America were much, much, much higher than that. And it was a stubborn problem. The physicians of the day knew that death rates were higher among babies born premature or with a communicable disease. And they knew that one of the keys to keeping those children alive was temperature regulation. But in a world without central heat or air conditioning, temperature regulation was no simple matter. And that was especially true in a city built of stone like Paris, where winters were wet and cold and summers were stiflingly hot. Now, in addition to being a physician, Tarnier was an animal enthusiast, and he visited the Paris Zoo regularly. Indeed, that's not very surprising that a physician whose primary interest is human biology would be interested also in animal biology. So, it tracks. This is an area of interest that was related, but not directly in his professional area. And one day, on his day off, Tarnier was at the zoo, as he often was, and he happened to come across a zookeeper lecturing at the chicken hatchery. The zookeeper explained how they used an incubator to keep the chickens at the right temperature, the chicken eggs at the right temperature, so that they would hatch normally and on time. Tarnier immediately pulled the zookeeper aside and asked, "What if the eggs were babies?" And the two got immediately to work, scaling up the incubator to fit a baby. Now, it was a little more, and you see a picture of it there, it was a little more than a box with a couple hot water bottles underneath, some air circulation, and a thermometer, but it worked. Within a few years, the infant mortality rate in Paris had dropped from 1 in 5 to 1 in 20. And along with vaccines, antibiotics, anesthesia, and a few other developments, Tarnier's incubator is one of the greatest medical breakthroughs of all time and has probably added more years to human life than any other single medical invention. Because if you think if you save a baby and that baby lives to be 80, you're gaining a lot more human years than if you save me and I live to be 75, right? If you cure my heart attack, well, fine, I live another 25 years, 30 years. But you save a baby, you gain 75 years of human life. But Tarnier's breakthrough didn't come from the center of his medical practice. It was a problem at the center of his medical practice that he wanted solved, but the solution didn't come from the study of human biology or human medicine. It came from the related study of zoology, from veterinary science. That is, it came from the adjacent possible. An example from my own work is an application we're building at Greenhouse called Sorcery. Sorcery's origin story begins more than 20 years ago in my grad student apartment in Washington, D.C. For the 5 years prior to moving to Washington, I had been studying for my PhD in Oxford. Recently married, my wife and I had moved to England for me to finish my studies on the agreement that as soon as I was finished with the coursework, I'd follow her back to the US so she could get her law degree, and that I'd finish my dissertation wherever she ended up. She got into Georgetown, and we moved to Washington, D.C. in 2001. Now, one day I was sitting alone at the kitchen table working through the notes I had taken on some documents at the British Library, and I couldn't read my handwriting. I needed another look at the document, but I had no way to get it. Camera phones were just starting to be a thing at that time, and I thought, I wish I could just pay some grad student a few bucks to fetch the document, take a picture, and email it to me in Washington. I knew from experience that there had to be a dozen fellow grad students sitting in the British Library at that very moment who would be happy to make a few quid to help me out. Alas, I had no way to know who they were or how to contact them. and I just gave up on that piece of my research. A few years later, I was out to dinner with a friend who was visiting from New York. At the end of the meal, I offered him a ride back to his hotel, and he said, "Let me see if I can Uber." I had no idea what he meant. He explained to me that Uber was a new ride-sharing service that was operating in New York. Uber connected people who had access to a car with people who needed a ride via a smartphone application equipped with geolocation services. I thought, here's the solution to my British Library problem. Now, it wasn't until the travel and social distancing challenges presented by the pandemic that I actually got around to starting work on the idea. But what we now call sorcery is essentially Uber for archives. Just as Uber connects people with access to a car to people who need a ride, sorcery connects people with access to an archive with people who need a document at that archive. A user places a request for a document through the Sorcery app. Sorcery finds another user nearby the archive where the document is held, and this sorcerer fetches the document, takes a picture, and sends it along in return for a modest fee. Uber for archives. Now, I didn't get this idea from the field of history. I didn't get it from the field of library science. I didn't even get it from the field of digital humanities. I got it from the field of ride sharing. I got it from the adjacent possible. Okay, I'm running a little late, so I'm gonna speed you through, and the unhealthy habits aren't as fun anyway as the healthy habits. So we shouldn't spend as much time on the healthy habits, should we? So I'm gonna speed through these a little bit. But I wanna just go through 3 things that you should avoid, 3 unhealthy habits, 3 things that stifle innovation, 3 things that people say, that you might even say, that when they come out of your mouth or that of somebody around you, you should stop yourself right in your tracks. Now, the first one of these is, we already do that. Very often, when one posits a new idea, they hear, we already do that, or that already exists, or that's not really new at all. As someone with ideas, you hear it all the time. Indeed, that's what they said when the first iPod hit the market. And it's true. When the iPod was released in late 2001, there were plenty of MP3 players already on the market. Who needed another one? Especially one that cost 5 times as much as the average MP3 player. Now, the MP3 player was invented to solve a problem of its predecessor. Some of you may be old enough like me to remember the Sony Walkman. It was an amazing device of the 1980s that allowed you to listen to your cassette tapes on the go. The Walkman. You could listen to music while you were walking. Unbelievable. And when cassettes were gradually replaced by CDs in the 1990s, Sony started building Walkmen that played CDs. But the CD Walkman had a serious problem. It skipped. It skipped like crazy. It was practically useless when you were, walking. MP3 players, on the other hand, as solid state storage devices like your flash drive or your hard drive in your computer, solid state, not a spinning disk, but a solid state storage device with no moving parts, solved the skipping problem. You'd take a CD, you'd move the music files onto the hard drive of your computer, and then you move them off of your computer and onto your MP3 player.
Oh,
It
no.
was essentially a solid state Walkman.
Huh?
And as a Walkman, it usually only held a single CD, or maybe 2, or maybe 3 CDs worth of music at a time. Now, partly this was the function of the cost of digital storage at a time. The Walkman cost about $50. And at that price point, an MP3 player couldn't hold enough storage for more than a couple of CDs to remain a viable business proposition. But more than that, it was a mental model problem. More than a pricing problem, it was a mental model problem. People had become accustomed to using the Walkman and listening to one record at a time. The new technology, the MP3 player, simply followed the model using different storage media. You'd put one album on your MP3 player and you'd listen to it. And it's true in key respects. The iPod, when it emerged, was simply an MP3 player. It operated the exact same way. It was the same technology, more or less. You ripped your CDs onto the hard drive of a computer and you moved them to the portable device for listening. People weren't crazy to say, we already have that. But the iPod was different in two key respects. First, it had a much, much larger hard drive, like 100 times larger, which accounted for the $400 to $500 price tag. Second, it had a large screen and a touch-based user interface that you could use while you were moving around. And these two things, the storage capacity and the interface, combined to make the iPod something much more than an expensive Walkman. The huge hard drive wasn't just a difference in degree, it was a difference in kind. All of a sudden, you didn't have to listen to just one album or the very few you could carry with you. You could take your entire music library with you wherever you want. And the touch interface allowed you to do much more than listen to one album at a time. You could pick and choose whatever song from whatever album you felt like listening to in the moment. You could sort and easily browse your catalog. You could make playlists based on genre or tempo or any other criteria. The fact of the matter is that the makers of the Walkman and the MP3 players didn't already do that. Although on the surface, they looked and to some extent worked the same, Apple was doing something altogether different with the iPod, something that shifted us from the media environment of the 20th century to the media environment of the 21st century, for better and for worse. I heard something similar when my colleagues and I at George Mason University launched our Omeka software. Omeka is a web application that allows museums and other cultural institutions to organize and present their collections online. And when we launched Omeka in 2007, there were already lots of software platforms for managing digital collections. And we heard over and over again in several rejected grant proposals, we already have one. What these grant readers didn't understand, though, is that the existing collections management platforms weren't intended for, they were intended for the desktop, not for the internet. Some of them had modules, usually at an additional cost, that would allow a curator to take some items in their database and put them online, but they were fundamentally engineered to work in a non-networked environment. Omeka, on the other hand, was web native. It was built using the technologies of the web expressly for operation on the web. And this allowed us to do things that made it more than just an online collections database, and rather a platform for online engagement around cultural heritage collections. Omeka isn't not a collections management system, but it also isn't just a collections management system. And that's the fundamental mistake people made when they told us, we already do that. They didn't already do that. And because the IMLS, which sadly is in trouble now, took a chance on us in 2007, Omeka today is used by tens of thousands of cultural heritage institutions around the world. Another thing you'll hear is, it isn't ready yet. You may even tell yourself this when you're doing something new and risky. Don't listen. Too often we think something has to be finished, to be perfect, before we show it to other people. And this is an incredibly unhealthy habit for innovation. An example of this is Gmail. Gmail was released in 2005 as a beta product. the beta signaling that it was still under construction. Gmail was developed by a small team of Google employees who needed a better way to manage the huge amounts of email that a startup like Google generated, an amount of email that more traditional businesses, less internet-focused businesses, did not experience, and that the email clients those businesses used couldn't handle. As an in-house tool, Gmail was buggy and unpolished, but it worked for the problems Gmail employees faced in important ways. The search function in particular was far superior, and really still is, to traditional email clients. The Gmail team also took a lesson from the iPod and provided users with a practically unlimited amount of online storage, so they could access all of their email from anywhere at any time. These innovations were significant enough that despite the bugs and rough edges, Google decided to open Gmail by invitation only to a small but real, authentic user base. And those early users provided the hands-on testing and feedback that Google needed to squash the bugs and sand down the rough edges. And when it was finally released to the general public, Gmail quickly became the dominant email platform, a status it retains today. The lesson here is that the perfect can be the enemy of the good. Trying to make something perfect often prohibits you from sharing something that's good enough, something that will allow you to get the stakeholder feedback you need to make it a real success. All right, last one. Show me the data. This is a personal pet peeve of mine. Very often when you propose something new, people will ask you to prove it to them, usually in numerical terms, why it's a good idea. And sometimes that's okay, but sometimes it's not. Data is generally good at telling you why you should do something. You can look at revenue figures, for example, and say, this part of our business is growing, we should do more of it. Data is good at making those kinds of affirmative decisions. But data is often bad at telling you why you shouldn't do something. And that's because you rarely have good data on the things you don't already do. Let's say you make cherry candy. You probably have good data on how the cherry candy business is doing. Maybe people are buying more cherry candy, and the data might tell you to make more of it. Maybe data says that people are buying less cherry candy and you should kill the cherry candy product line. But nothing in that data about cherry candy can tell you whether you should launch a grape candy business. Now, philosophers know that it isn't true that you can't prove a negative, but they also know that it takes a lot more work to prove a negative. Now, data is important. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be aware of data in our business decisions, but I don't think we should be data-driven. Data is important and can tell us a lot if we listen to it. But the problem is that our data also contains infinite silences. And those silences, what the data doesn't say, are as rich and robust as the stories, the real stories, that the data tells. Because there is infinitely more data in the world than we can ever collect in a spreadsheet, we need to be wary of listening too much to our spreadsheets. Here's Ken Olsen again. There is no reason for any individual to have a computer in his home. And here's Steve Jobs. A lot of times, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. If Jobs had listened to Ken Olsen's spreadsheets, we wouldn't have the Mac. If he had listened to the market research that said nobody would pay $500 for an MP3 player, we wouldn't have the iPhone. It's not that Olsen was dumb, or that his data was incorrect, or that he was reading it wrong. It's just that his spreadsheets didn't know the things he didn't know. So how do we meet the challenge of being innovative? What can we do to promote the healthy habits and avoid the unhealthy habits? Well, if you've listened closely, you'll have noticed a through line here that distinguishes the healthy habits from the unhealthy habits. And that thing is connection. The healthy habits, operationalizing byproducts for new audiences, cultivating subcultures, exploring the adjacent possible. Those habits connect us with new people, new places, ideas, domains, and networks. The unhealthy habits, on the other hand, telling ourselves and others that we already do that, it's not ready yet, and show me the data, isolate us, close off connections, close off pathways to new information. The more connections you can make to people, places, ideas, domains, and networks, the more innovative you will be. So what does it mean to make connections in practice? Here are a couple of ideas. First, explore your excess capacity. We're always thinking about the things we don't have, the things we need. I don't have enough money, I don't have enough time, and maybe that's true. But what do you have enough of? Where do you have extra? Your next project may be sitting right there. Second, take time to tinker. Time spent screwing around with new software products, for instance, is not time wasted. Migrating your to-do list from one task manager to another task manager, or from one kind of notebook to another kind of notebook, isn't time wasted. Writing an email filter so your email inbox looks different is not time wasted. You may feel like it's wasting time, but it's not. What you're really doing is opening up your mind to new connections, new skills, new workflows, new problems, new opportunities. Third, you should reopen closed issues, problems you think you have solved in the past, problems where you think you have it already done. Do it again. Do it differently. The world has changed since you solved the problem. You've changed. Maybe there's a new solution out there that's bigger and better than the first solution. Maybe there's a new audience for that solution. Fourth, honor your hunches. Remember the silences in spreadsheets and know that there's a bigger spreadsheet, a larger database in the accumulated experience of your senses, in your combined experience, in the combined experience of you and your colleagues, a database that's much bigger and has much more data than any Excel file could ever hold. Fifth, plan for serendipity. Go to the zoo. Go for a hike. Read a book that you wouldn't normally read. Watch a show you normally wouldn't watch. Go to a party that you normally wouldn't go to. Connect to the adjacent possible. And finally, don't spend time alone if you can spend time together. Cultivate your networks of family, friends, colleagues, and coworkers. Meet a stranger in a coffee shop. We are social animals. The people around you, more than anything else, are your adjacent possible. Connect. That's my talk. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Tom. If you stop sharing, I know we have a couple of minutes. Does anyone
Yeah,
have
sorry, I
any?
went a little long, but I'm happy to
Yeah,
take questions if there are
no,
questions. And I
very
didn't get to
interesting.
talking about some of the present challenges, so any questions on that would be welcome.
Okay. Anyone who has a question, if you guys want to take yourselves, put your video on and take yourself off mute. I found a couple of things that Tom said fascinating. I like that when you were talking about your treehouse group, that the success of the program showed the need. So looking back, you could say, we didn't know that there was this need, but we had this, this program that sort of started organically, and because it was so successful, you saw the need. Okay, a bunch of people saying thank you and having to jump off. I know that some of us
Yeah,
do
I
have
think, I mean, I
1 o'clock
think one of the
meetings.
things to keep in mind is that the people in your organization can often be um, almost your best focus groups. Um, the, and to be honest, the younger people in the organization can often tell you where the new needs are, because they're more in touch with those with the future needs. more than the present needs. So yeah,
Sure.
absolutely. That
Or
we rely on our students to tell us what's coming next.
or even like a new partner who's just joining, your team for sure, just getting that new perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah, the more, as I said, the more connections, the more people you can involve, the better you're going to be.
Excellent. Deborah, I see that your hand is raised. Why don't you take yourself off mute?
And, you know, very
You're
Hmm.
very quiet, Deborah.
Yeah,
I
you're
don't
really
know if other
quiet.
people.
it's my system. It's my system.
Why don't you
Sorry.
type your question? Oh, there she goes. Got your head. Much better, much better. Oh, and I think she's frozen.
I think it's my system. Can you hear
Oh,
There
me?
you
there you
go.
go.
I
I
can
can
hear
hear
you.
you.
Okay, great. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with my computer today, but something's going on. I just wanted to tell you that the leftovers idea was really, really provocative to me because there have been a couple of things that some of my clients are doing that it's just making me realize that there are things they do that they can sell.
Yeah, we do so much more in our work than we put in front of our customers or audiences or what stakeholders, whatever they are. You know, we produce lots and lots of things that we treat as byproducts or interim products or just process. And a lot of those things are valuable. And things that we think are just part of the daily grind or everybody knows that already. A lot of times they don't already know it. They don't have that process where they work and could use it. So those things are a really really rich mine of new ideas.
Great. And Pamela asked in the chat, how do you identify which byproducts might be worth operationalizing? Which
It
is
is
great.
this is a great question, and it's hard. Um, I would look at things that solve things that you make or do or use that solve really generalized problems, right? Things that are not specific to your domain or your particular product or your particular business. Things that all businesses need, things that um, all people do. So like Amazon Web Services, like by 2005, everybody needed a website, right? Amazon was just really good at making websites. So that was an obvious one. That was with our network lab. We needed to learn how to collaborate better online, but we realized like, oh, so do all our colleagues. Like this is not a unique problem. This is a generalized problem. And part of it is honestly, part of it is I don't know whether it's boldness or arrogance, but part of it is having the confidence to say the solution I've come up with to this generalized problem is a good one, and maybe people could learn from the things we've done. Um, and that sometimes is hard because you're also like that's the kind of stuff we like to sort of hide. Sometimes we don't want to show people the we call it the sausage making, right? You don't want to show people that. Well, lots of people need to make sausage, and a lot of people could benefit from seeing that.
I had this great Vista last year, AmeriCorps Vista, who I, assigned her a grant to write because I wanted her to, have the opportunity to write a full grant start to finish. And she sort of had at the bottom of her Google Doc when she was sharing the narrative with me, all of this narrative that she had to cut from the original because she didn't realize at first that there were character limits. And she was like, I'm just going to trash this. And I was like, no, 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 don't trash that. And I have used that data that she pulled, that was, you know, that beautiful language that she put together that we couldn't use in that grant application. Of course, I've been able to use it since then, which was so helpful. And anytime I use it, I text her. You know, she doesn't work with us now, but you know, it's nice to have that. You don't get rid of it.
That is
That's the
such a great
leftovers.
example. I have a text file that sits on my desktop. It's called my cut file. And when I, exactly in that circumstance, when I have to cut something, or, you know, whether because of a page limit or just because it doesn't fit, I dump it in that cut file so that you don't know when that's going to be useful. And if you just really delete it, it's gone forever. So it sometimes pays to be a pack rat like that.
Definitely. Absolutely. Any other questions? You know, Pamela says, brilliant, fascinating talk. Thank you, Tom.
Oh, thank
I
you, everybody.
agree. I really appreciate you coming and sharing your expertise. A little bit different than what we usually have, which is more like really grant professional focused. But I love this. I feel like it can be sort of used anywhere in our lives for sure, at home, at work, in the office, in our businesses. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise and coming. To everyone who came, thank you for coming. I will be sending out that survey and the recording. And if you have questions, please get back to us at info.gplh@gmail.com. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.